San Francisco, a city nestled by the sea, renowned for its iconic waterfront and a bustling downtown. But this beautiful scene stands on the precipice of immense change. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. Rising sea levels and increasingly powerful storms loom at San Francisco's doorstep. City leaders aren't taking the risk idly. A colossal $13 billion plan promises to transform the Embarcadero as we know it. Imagine roads and even the landmark ferry building elevated a staggering 7 feet in an unprecedented battle against the encroaching water. The scale of this project is staggering, and so are the stakes, not just for today, but for generations to come. But this ambitious effort brings potential disruption on an unimaginable scale. Businesses could face extended closures, traffic snarls, and a fundamentally altered landscape. Can San Francisco navigate these sacrifices to safeguard its future, or will the price of this daring solution prove too high? As you see this recent footage from the October 2021 atmospheric river storm, you can almost feel the rising panic. This wasn't a sudden downpour. It was hours of relentless rain, revealing how even one of America's most beloved cities buckles when the sea decides to reclaim its space. This isn't an isolated incident. It's becoming terrifyingly routine. In 2022, a New Year's Eve storm turned the historic ferry building into a temporary island, with waves battering its walls and flooding the walkways. And even those sunny king tides now leave the Embarcadero awash, creeping further inland. We can't dismiss these as freaks of nature anymore. The ocean is pushing back, and San Francisco is on the front line. This isn't a scare tactic, but a hard reality derived from meticulous scientific analysis. Coastal storms aren't the only culprit. High tides are increasingly a menace in their own right. Areas of the Embarcadero already feel the effects of king tides, the highest of the naturally occurring ones. These commonplace events become overwhelming when boosted by extreme weather or rising sea levels. This battle with rising seas has immediate consequences. Each time the Embarcadero floods, we don't just see images of damage, but a vision of potential economic catastrophe. Imagine significant businesses shut down for weeks or even permanently, livelihoods ripped away alongside those floodwaters. Think of traffic gridlock turning the city's heartbeat into an irregular stutter. Every new storm raises higher stakes. And yet, experts warn that the floods witnessed so far are mere previews of what is to come. As the ocean continues its expansion, so too does the potential for devastation. A potent combination of increased sea levels and an extreme storm, an event projected to be more and more likely as the climate destabilizes, could drown crucial parts of San Francisco. Market Street could become a river, cutting off transportation arteries and flooding underground systems like BART and Muni. Climate scientists don't operate in hypotheticals, but in projections based on complex data. If current trends continue, they estimate a staggering 3.5-foot rise in sea level in the bay by the end of this century. That number alone would be enough to leave portions of the modern-day Embarcadero completely submerged routinely. What San Francisco is facing isn't just a nuisance, but a fundamental threat to its identity. The Embarcadero's waterfront views, bustling businesses, and historical landmarks define the city's character. Imagine sections of that lost beneath the relentless push of the waves. San Francisco wouldn't cease to exist, but it would be fundamentally, irrevocably altered. That's why a bold, some might even say radical, plan is taking shape, and what is proposed will transform San Francisco as we know it. Let's start with the most iconic and most urgent part of the project. Visualize the Embarcadero as it exists today. Now imagine sections of that familiar roadway raised upwards by up to 7 feet. That's not just a cosmetic makeover, it's a fight for existence. This monumental elevation is needed to counter the projected impact of relentless sea level rise, shielding both the Embarcadero itself and the heart of the city behind it. But raising the ground alone isn't enough. Think of the area near the beloved ferry building as ground zero. To protect not just the structure, but vital transportation hubs in the area, an extensive ring of flood defenses encircling this area is envisioned. While those specific designs aren't final, they might include barriers, gates, even temporary berms deployed when flood risk becomes extreme. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be necessary. Now, follow this shoreline south from the ferry building. The plan extends beyond the most tourist-heavy zones. Flood protection in some areas means simply reinforcing what already exists, bolstering existing barriers or walls where possible. Perhaps the oddest change might be seen in places like Aquatic Park and Heron's Head Park. Here, simple wall upgrades aren't enough. To provide protection from extreme surge events, there are plans to significantly raise the parks themselves. Think gradual sloping hills or man-made terraces leading up to the shoreline. This, sadly, is where the concept of the picturesque stroll by the bay becomes a casualty of adaptation. We have to be honest, these aren't quick fixes. The ferry building alone might be closed for years during the most intensive work. Imagine how many businesses will be disrupted, how the iconic waterfront becomes transformed into a sprawling construction zone. Think of the daily commute being rerouted, traffic chaos during work periods. This transformation will make life harder for San Franciscans even before it makes things safer. Even iconic sites like the ferry building might be off limits while the most intensive work takes place. The economic shockwaves alone might prove as severe as any temporary flood. This raises a final point: cost. $13 billion. That's not the city's budget for a year, that's the rough price tag for simply keeping the bay at bay. And here's the brutal truth. Even if federal dollars swoop in and cover a hefty chunk, San Franciscans can expect this project to leave its mark on their wallets. There's just no way around it. Higher taxes? It's the most obvious potential solution, but a deeply unpopular one given the high cost of living in the city. New, targeted fees for waterfront businesses or residents could fill those funding gaps. But will those paying feel they're shouldering a fair burden? The alternative sounds far more dire, gutting other city services to find money for mega barriers and fortified coastlines. Can you imagine less funding for education and less maintenance for already aging infrastructure, all because the fight against the ocean takes priority? It's a nightmare scenario that must be explored if dedicated funding sources aren't established. And just because construction begins doesn't mean those expenses end. We know from countless previous projects that cost overruns and delays are guaranteed in massive endeavors like this. Who will pick up the slack if estimates prove faulty? Do those taxes ever go back down? Or is this a financial burden San Francisco's carry for generations? It's worth pointing out that this plan still exists, mainly on paper. Even if it gets congressional approval, which is far from certain, years of further design, environmental review, and public comment lie ahead. What is the earliest projected completion date? 2040. That's assuming an unusually smooth political process and, frankly, some luck that nature doesn't deliver even more devastating floods. In short, if San Franciscans think this fight is only against the sea, they're sadly mistaken. The toughest battles for this plan might be fought in City Hall, at the ballot box, or during heated community meetings. Will citizens agree on the urgency of the threat, on the sacrifices required? Those human-made forces could stall this out just as surely as any tide. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think this expensive plan is necessary? Is there a realistic way to raise the money? Let us know in the comments. And finally, if you found this video thought-provoking, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.